I'm a 38-year-old warehouse worker. Last December, I delivered Christmas boxes to families in need. The last stop was a tired duplex with a hollow-eyed mother and twin girls. As I unloaded the final box, one girl tugged my sleeve. "Are you our gift?" she whispered. Her sister added, "Mama said if we prayed enough, God would send a daddy." I had only come to drop off boxes, but when I drove away, I knew I'd left something behind. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the scene. The tired mother, the single strand of Christmas lights, the little girl's hand on my sleeve. See, I'm not the kind of man who gets involved. 10 years ago, my marriage ended and I sealed myself off. I work a warehouse job I keep to myself, and I like it that way. That delivery wasn't supposed to be anything but a few boxes. But when I drove away, I realized for the first time in a decade I didn't feel invisible. I felt chosen. And I knew deep in my gut that I had to go back. The next morning, I called my supervisor and told him I had a family emergency. It was the first time in 5 years I'd missed a shift. My name is David Callahan. I'm a level 2 picker at the Stockwell Logistics Center off Pine Gap Road. I drive a forklift, I clock in, I keep my head down, and I leave exactly at 5:15. For 10 years, that routine was my safety. My marriage ended when I was 28. Her name was Ellie. She said I'd built so many walls around my heart she couldn't find me anymore. She wasn't wrong. I never blamed her for leaving. But after she took her things and moved to Tulsa, I decided relationships were a door I'd close permanently. No dating, no close friendships, no letting anyone pass the perimeter. The church volunteer list was my first exception, and even then I only signed up because my neighbor, Mrs. Alton, left a sticky note on my door that said, "God gives you a truck for a reason." I drove to the community center, loaded boxes without talking to anyone, and set out to deliver them. Of the 12 addresses on my list, 11 had been exactly what I expected. Tired parents, grateful kids, small talk about the weather. And then I reached the duplex on County Line Road. The next day, I found myself idling in my truck outside that same duplex. The morning sun was pale and the strand of Christmas lights was still hanging, unlit now, a sad drooping line across the porch. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't even know their last name. I got out and knocked. The door opened a crack. The woman with the hollowed-out eyes stared at me. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail and she wore a faded flannel robe. "Delivery guy," she said, her voice guarded. "I don't have any more boxes," I said. Are you all right?" She looked at me like the question was a foreign language. Nobody asks that of a woman drowning. She pulled the door open wider as if she didn't have the energy to argue. The twins appeared behind her legs, two identical faces with messy braids and dark, curious eyes. The one on the left pointed at me. "You're the box man." Her sister nodded solemnly. "You came back." I squatted down to their level. "I did. What are your names?" "I'm Emma," said the one on the left. "And she's Grace." Grace pressed her face against her mother's leg but didn't look away. Their mother introduced herself as Maya. She was 34. Her husband, Daniel, had walked out 6 months earlier with a 22-year-old waitress from a diner 2 towns over. No child support, no forwarding address. Just a note on the kitchen counter that read, "I can't do this anymore." Maya's parents had cut her off when she married him, convinced he was trouble, and now she was too ashamed to call and ask for help. She worked the morning shift at a dry cleaner and nights as a home health aide for an elderly woman named Mrs. Hargrove. The duplex rent was $400 a month, and she was behind by 2 payments. She hadn't told the girls about the money. But the space heater in their bedroom was broken, and the kitchen faucet dripped constantly, and their only food that week had been the boxes I brought. When she finished explaining, she folded her arms and looked at me with the hard-won suspicion of someone who had learned that every kindness came with a price tag. "Why are you really here?" she asked. I didn't have a tidy answer. "Last night I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Emma asked me if I was your gift. And I realized I haven't felt needed in 10 years. I came back the next Saturday with a space heater, a bag of groceries, and a toolbox. The porch step was rotted through, a lawsuit waiting to happen. I replaced the board while the girls watched from the window, tapping on the glass. The Saturday after that I fixed the faucet. The Saturday after that I brought a Christmas tree I picked up for $20 at a roadside stand. Maya tried to refuse. "We can't pay you back," she said, her jaw tight. "I'm not asking for payment," I said. "I'm just here." That became our rhythm. Every Saturday I'd show up with something: milk, eggs, a bag of clementines, a puzzle for the girls, an extra blanket. I'd fix what was broken. I'd stay for dinner when Maya insisted. I'd sit on the floor while Emma and Grace showed me their drawings. They always drew the same thing: a house, a mom, two girls, and an empty space where a father should be. One evening Grace placed her latest drawing in my lap. The empty space now had a stick figure with a blue crayon scribble for clothes. "That's you," she said. Maya turned away toward the stove, her shoulders trembling. "Grace, honey, Mr. David he's just helping for now." I didn't correct her, but the word "now" sat in my chest like a stone. The week before Christmas, the temperature dropped to 8 degrees. The duplex's furnace gave out on a Thursday night. Maya called every repair company in town, but no one would come until after the holiday unless she paid triple the rate. She had $37 in her bank account. I found out the next morning when I arrived for my Saturday visit and found the girls huddled on the couch under a pile of coats, their breath visible in the air. Maya was on the phone with her landlord, her voice cracking. When she hung up, she looked at me with a terror I understood. She wasn't afraid of the cold. She was afraid of failing those two little girls. "He said if I can't pay the back rent by the 24th, he's filing eviction," she whispered. "They'll put us on the street right before Christmas." I offered to cover what she owed. She shook her head hard. "No, I will not be a charity case. I've already taken too much from you." I stepped closer. "Maya, it's not charity, it's—" I struggled for the right word. Her eyes bore into me with a challenge. "It's what?" she asked. I didn't have the courage to say the word I felt, so I said nothing, and the silence between us grew as cold as the room. That night the snowstorm arrived. The wind whipped across the flat fields beyond County Line Road, and the power flickered 3 times before it went out completely. We sat in the dark, the girls huddled between me and Maya on the couch, wrapped in blankets. I lit a single candle I found in a kitchen drawer. Emma's little voice trembled in the darkness. "Are we going to be okay?" Maya squeezed her hand. "We're safe, baby, we're all together." But her eyes found mine across the small flame, and I saw the terror still there. She had nowhere else to turn. The wind howled like a living thing. Grace crawled onto my lap and tucked her head under my chin. "You won't leave us, will you?" she whispered. I opened my mouth to answer, but the truth was I still didn't know if I was brave enough to stay. And before I could speak, a loud crack splintered the night outside, and something heavy slammed into the side of the house. I shot to my feet before the sound fully registered. The house shuddered and the candle flickered wildly, sending long shadows across the walls. Maya grabbed both girls and pulled them against her chest. "Stay here," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I fumbled through the dark hallway toward the side door, my phone flashlight cutting a weak beam through the blackness. The door was stuck. I put my shoulder into it and shoved hard, snow and freezing wind blasting me in the face as I stumbled outside. A massive limb from the old oak tree at the corner of the property had sheared off under the weight of ice and snow. It lay across the side of the duplex like a fallen giant. Its jagged end punched through the exterior wall into the girls' bedroom. The window was shattered, the drywall caved inward, and snow was already piling on the small pink rug where Emma and Grace played dress-up. If they had been in there, they would have been crushed. I stared at the destruction, my breath clouding in the frozen air, and felt something shift decisively in my chest. The storm wasn't just weather anymore. It was a warning. This family was hanging by a splintered thread, and the next gust would tear them apart for good. I went back inside and told Maya what had happened. She pressed her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes, the kind of silent prayer that expects no answer. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, the 4 of us wrapped in every blanket we could find, the boarded-up window barely keeping the wind at bay. Grace slept with her head on my shoulder, Emma curled against Maya's side. I didn't sleep at all. By morning the storm had passed, and the sun glared off the frozen ground with a cruel brightness. The landlord arrived before noon. His name was Grover Pence, a thick man with a red face and the conversational charm of an overdue bill. He walked around the broken limb, prodded the hole in the wall with a gloved hand, and shook his head. Unsafe conditions, he said, not to Maya but to a notebook he pulled from his coat. This was already a tight situation. Now the place is structurally compromised. I can't have tenants in a hazard zone. Maya stood on the porch in her worn coat, the girls peeking from behind the door. Mr. Pence, this wasn't our fault. The tree is your property. You have to fix it. He looked at her with the flat indifference of a man who had evicted a dozen families before breakfast. I don't have to do anything but protect my investment. You're 2 months behind. Now this, I'm filing for eviction. You got till the end of the week. He turned and trudged back to his truck, leaving Maya rooted to the spot like the cold had frozen her solid. But here's the thing about Rock Bottom. It has a basement. 2 days later, a green sedan pulled up to the curb. A woman in a navy pantsuit stepped out, clipboard in hand. I knew what she was before she introduced herself. Child Protective Services. A neighbor had called. The storm damage, the cold, the two little girls living in a house with no heat and now a gaping hole in the wall. Maya received the news like a physical blow, her hands gripping the doorframe to keep herself upright. The social worker, Ms. Landry, was not unkind. She sat at the kitchen table and asked questions about income, food, the girls' health, school attendance. Maya answered each one in a voice that trembled but didn't break. I stayed because leaving felt like abandonment. When Ms. Landry asked who I was, Maya's mouth opened and nothing came out. I stepped forward. I'm David Callahan. I'm a friend of the family. The social worker made a note. I saw the word non-relative scribbled onto her pad, and that single word filled me with an irrational terror, because I understood what it meant. A non-relative has no legal standing. A non-relative can't fight for custody. A non-relative disappears when the system takes over. That night after the girls were asleep on the couch, Maya and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting hollow shadows. She looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than sleep. They could take them, she said, staring at a water stain on the ceiling. If I can't provide a stable home, and I can't, not right now, the eviction, the furnace, the hole in the wall, I have no family, no money. What judge would let them stay with me? Her voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to reach across the table and take her hand, but I didn't. The walls I'd built were still there, even if they were starting to crumble. Then she looked at me, her eyes wet but fierce. You need to stop coming here, I blinked. What? If they see you here, a single man staying overnight, they'll question my judgment. They'll say I'm exposing the girls to an unstable environment. You have to go, David, for Emma and Grace. The logic was cruel and undeniable. I sat there, feeling the familiar pull of retreat, the old instinct to withdraw before anyone could get close enough to hurt me. But then I thought about Grace's drawing, the blue stick figure standing in the empty space. And I thought about that question on the porch. Are you our gift? I had spent 10 years hiding from the world because I was afraid of being left again. But these two little girls and their mother were the ones being left. By a father, by a system, by a society that had no use for struggling women with no safety net. I wasn't going to be another name on that list. Marry me. The words came out of my mouth before my brain could approve them. Maya recoiled, her eyes going wide. Are you insane? Probably, I admitted. But listen. I'm 38 years old. I have a steady job, a clean record, and a small apartment that's warm and dry. It's not much, but it's safe. If we get married, CPS won't see a single mother at risk. They'll see a two-parent household. They'll see stability. And Pence can't evict you if you've already moved out. You and the girls can stay with me until we figure something out. Maya shook her head, her arms crossed tight. Marriage isn't a loophole. It's not something you do because a caseworker asks too many questions. I know what marriage is, I said, my voice dropping. I tried it once. It failed because I couldn't let anyone in. But I've spent 10 years learning what loneliness costs, and I would rather spend the rest of my life in a marriage that's just on paper than watch those girls get taken away knowing I could have done something. Maya stared at me, her expression shifting from disbelief to a raw, searching intensity. Why do you care so much, she whispered. About us, you don't even know us. I leaned forward, my forearms on the table. I care because your daughters looked at a stranger on a porch and asked if I was the answer to their prayers, because they still believe in miracles, and because I realize that if I walk away now, I'll be proving them wrong, and I can't live with that. The silence stretched. A clock ticked somewhere in the dark. Then Maya lifted her chin, her jaw set. If we do this, it's a partnership, a contract. You don't owe me anything beyond a roof, and I don't owe you anything beyond helping with the apartment and making sure the girls don't interfere with your life. Separate rooms. We're not husband and wife in anything but paperwork. I nodded. Agreed. She let out a breath that carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Then we do it tomorrow, before the eviction hearing, before CPS comes back. The next morning, we stood in the county clerk's office with the girls in their best dresses, the ones with faded flowers and hems that were slightly too short. Emma held my hand. Grace held Maya's. The clerk, a tired man named Mr. Simmons, read the vows in a monotone. There were no rings. Maya borrowed a pen from the counter to sign the certificate. When the clerk asked for witnesses, an elderly couple waiting for a marriage license of their own agreed to sign. The woman dabbed her eyes. "Young love," she said. "So sweet." Maya and I exchanged a glance that said everything we couldn't. This was not love, this was a lifeboat. We moved Maya and the girls into my apartment that afternoon. It took 2 trips in the truck, they didn't have much. Clothes, a few toys, a crate of kitchen items, the Christmas tree I'd bought. My apartment was a 1-bedroom with a pull-out couch in the living room. I gave Maya and the girls the bedroom. I took the couch. The first night was awkward and silent. Grace asked why we all lived together now. Maya told her we were a new kind of family. Emma considered this, then announced that I should read bedtime stories because daddies do that. The word landed in the room like a dropped glass. Maya started to correct her, but I knelt down and said, "I'm not very good at voices, but I'll try." I read them Goodnight Moon, doing a terrible cow impression that made both girls giggle. When I closed the book and turned off the light, Emma's small voice came from the darkness. "David, will you still be here when we wake up?" I stood in the doorway, my throat tight. "Yes," I said, "I will," and I meant it. For 2 weeks the arrangement worked. Maya found a temporary job at a laundromat and I adjusted my shifts to be home when the girls got off the school bus. We cooked meals together, navigated the cramped space, and slowly the awkwardness began to soften. I learned that Grace liked her sandwiches cut into triangles, not squares, and that Emma was terrified of thunderstorms. I learned that Maya hummed old hymns when she was nervous, and that she cried silently in the bathroom some nights when she thought everyone was asleep. One evening, she found me on the couch staring at a photo album of my failed marriage. She didn't ask questions. She just sat down beside me, her shoulder touching mine, and we watched the streetlights flicker on through the window. "I was married to a ghost even before he left," she said quietly. "Daniel was never really there. Not for me, not for the girls. I thought if I tried hard enough, I could make him want to stay." She looked at me. "I'm tired of trying to make people stay." I closed the album. "Then don't. Maybe this time we just let ourselves be right where we are." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed mine and stayed there for a long moment. It was the first time I thought this arrangement might become something more. But stability is a fragile thing. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from work to find a strange car in the parking lot. An older sedan, dented and rusted with out-of-state plates. Maya was standing outside my apartment door, her face white as paper. Emma and Grace were behind her, clutching each other. And on the doorstep, with a smirk that curdled my blood, stood a man I recognized from Maya's description. Daniel, the ex-husband. He had come back. He was taller than I expected. 6 feet thin, with a face that had been handsome once but was now hollowed out by late nights and cheap decisions. Daniel wore a faded leather jacket and a smirk that said he knew exactly how much damage his presence could do. He didn't even glance at me at first. His eyes found Maya and the girls, and he spread his arms wide like a prodigal father returning from a long journey. "There's my girls," he said. "Daddy's home." Emma and Grace didn't run to him. They shrank back, pressing themselves into Maya's legs. I saw Grace's hand find Emma's and squeeze. They had learned somewhere in those 6 months of silence that this man was not safe. Maya's voice was ice. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" He shrugged, hands in pockets. "Heard you were in a bind. Thought I'd come check on my kids. A man's got a right to see his children, especially when their mother is shacking up with some stranger in a 1-bedroom apartment." He finally looked at me, sizing me up with the lazy contempt of a man who had never held a steady job but always found someone else to blame. "You the new daddy?" That was fast. I didn't take the bait. I stepped forward until I was between him and the family. "I'm David and you're trespassing." Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Trespassing? They're my kids, pal. I'm on the birth certificates. I've got rights. You're just a guy who happened to be in the right place at the right time." He leaned around me to address Maya. "I want visitation, and if you don't cooperate, I'll take this to court. Let's see how a judge feels about a mother who married a warehouse worker she barely knows just to game the system." That word, game, hung in the air like a threat, because he was right about one thing. Our marriage looked like a transaction. CPS had already flagged it. If Daniel pushed, a family court judge might not see a desperate act of protection. They might see fraud, instability, a home unfit for children. Maya stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. "You abandoned us. You left without a word, no money, no nothing. You don't get to walk back in here and play the concerned father." Daniel's smirk faltered. "I had things to figure out, but I'm back now. I'm ready to be a dad." He looked at the girls and squatted down. "Come give your old man a hug." Emma pressed her face into Maya's coat. Grace just stared at him with those dark, knowing eyes. She said, "You're the one who made Mommy cry." The smirk vanished entirely. Daniel straightened, his jaw tight. Maya told him to leave. He said he'd be back, and this time he'd bring a sheriff. Then he walked to his dented sedan, but not before looking at me one last time. "Better lawyer up, hero. You're in over your head." That night, after the girls were asleep and Maya had cried herself dry, we sat at the kitchen table and made a list of everyone we could call. Legal aid had a 3-week waiting list. A private family attorney wanted a $5,000 retainer. I had $1,200 in savings. Maya had nothing. We were one bad ruling away from losing everything. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and pulled every public record I could find on Daniel. What I discovered made my blood run cold. He had a string of unpaid debts, 2 outstanding warrants for writing bad checks in Louisiana, and a previous domestic disturbance call from a girlfriend in Mobile. Charges dropped, but the report was still there. This was not a man who wanted to be a father. This was a man who saw his children as leverage, and he had one more weapon we hadn't anticipated. The following Tuesday, Ms. Landry returned. This time she wasn't alone. She had a man with her, a supervisor. They had received an anonymous complaint alleging that Maya and I were living in an inappropriate domestic arrangement. An unrelated male sharing a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 minor girls, and that the marriage was a sham to defraud housing assistance and evade CPS intervention. We showed them the marriage certificate. We showed them the separate sleeping arrangements. Ms. Landry looked at the pull-out couch where I slept, at the bedroom where Maya and the girls had their beds. She took notes, her expression unreadable. Then she asked to speak to the girls alone. Maya had no choice but to agree. When they left, the supervisor said they would file a report and that we could expect a follow-up home study. If the findings were unfavorable, the girls could be placed in temporary foster care pending a full custody hearing. The walls closed in. But here, where the story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming, that afternoon, I received a call from my supervisor at Stockwell. Someone had sent an anonymous letter to company HR claiming that I was using company time to run personal errands, that I had abandoned my shift to visit a girlfriend's house, a reference to that first Saturday I'd missed work. HR was opening an investigation. If I lost my job, we'd lose the apartment. We lose everything. The letter had no signature, but I knew exactly who sent it. Daniel wasn't just trying to take the girls. He was trying to dismantle our entire life, piece by piece. I went home and told Maya. She sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the floor for a long time. Then she said something that shifted my understanding of the whole situation. "Daniel doesn't just want the girls. He wants to punish me. He always did. When we were married, he'd disappear for days, then come back and accuse me of cheating, of making him feel small. He'd tell me I was worthless, that no one else would ever want me. The night he left, he said I'd never escape him. He said he'd make sure of it." Her voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't about custody, it's about control." I knelt in front of her. "Then we fight, not just for the girls, for you, for every woman he thinks he can break." She looked at me, and I saw something flicker behind the exhaustion. Something that looked like hope. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, an emergency petition filed by Daniel's court-appointed attorney. Yes, he had managed to get a lawyer through some legal aid loophole. He claimed Maya had fled with the children without his consent, that she was living in a deplorable environment with an unrelated male, and that her recent marriage was a desperate attempt to manufacture stability. He painted himself as a reformed father who had spent months searching for his family. The lies were breathtaking. We scraped together enough for a consultation with a family law attorney, a tired woman named Ms. Alberts who listened to our story without flinching. She told us the honest truth. If Daniel's parental rights had never been terminated, and if he could convince a judge he was fit, he could win at least partial custody. The shoddy marriage would be a mark against Maya's judgment. And my presence as a brand new husband, not the biological father, would be a double-edged sword. But there was one advantage: Daniel's criminal record, his abandonment, his lack of any stable home or income. We could paint him as the deadbeat he was. The question was whether we could do it in time. We started building a file. I reached out to the neighbor, Mrs. Alton, who had seen me deliver the Christmas boxes and could testify to my character. I got statements from the dry cleaner where Maya worked, her supervisor saying she was reliable. I dug deeper into Daniel's past, finding the old police report from Mobile. I even tracked down the waitress he'd run off with. Her name was Tiffany, and when I called her, she laughed bitterly. He told me he was divorced. When I found out the truth, I kicked him out. He stole $300 from my purse. If you find him, tell him I want my money. That was the nail we needed. A pattern of deception and theft, but the court date was just days away. Then 2 days before the hearing, Daniel made his move. I was at work trying to salvage my job when my phone buzzed. Maya's number. I answered, and her voice was pure panic. He took them. He took Emma and Grace from school. The principal said he showed up with a birth certificate, said he was picking them up for a family emergency, and they let them go. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. I left work without permission, knowing I might never come back. I drove to the school, then to the police station, then back to the apartment where Maya was packing, tears streaming down her face. The officer on the phone said it was a civil matter. Without a custody order preventing it, Daniel, as the legal father, could take the kids. He hadn't broken any law. He had simply walked them out of the school and disappeared. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the toys and drawings of 2 little girls who had finally started to feel safe. The apartment was quiet, a terrifying echo of the silence I had lived in for 10 years. But this silence wasn't peaceful. It was a scream waiting to happen. I turned to Maya, who looked at me with the desperate, unspoken question, "What do we do now?" And I realized I had one answer, something I had never done for anyone. I would fight. I didn't sleep at all that night. Maya lay on the couch, wrapped in the girl's favorite blanket, her eyes open and hollow. Every hour I called the police, the school, the bus station. No one had seen them. The dawn came gray and freezing, and with it a single text from an unknown number. "They're safe, for now. Withdraw the custody case and maybe I'll let you see them again." Daniel didn't know it, but that message was a mistake. It proved he had taken the children and was using them as leverage. I took it straight to the police station, along with the printouts of his Louisiana warrants and the statement from Tiffany about the stolen money. This time they listened. The officer in charge, a sergeant named Ruiz, leaned forward when he saw the text. "This crosses the line," he said. "It's custodial interference at minimum, and with the interstate flight and prior warrants, this is now a criminal investigation." I told Ruiz about the tip from Tiffany, that Daniel might be holed up at a pay-by-the-week motel off the interstate, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of an unmarked cruiser, Maya in the back, as we rolled into the parking lot of the Pine View Motor Inn. And there it was, the dented sedan with out-of-state plates, parked outside room 14. What happened next was a blur of radio calls and slammed doors. Ruiz and 2 other officers approached the room. I stayed back with Maya, her hand gripping mine so hard I thought my bones might crack. The door opened a crack, then wider, and I saw Daniel's face twist from smug confidence to panic as he spotted the badges. He tried to slam the door, but Ruiz already had his foot in the gap. Inside, on the motel bed, Emma and Grace sat huddled together, still in their school clothes from the day before, their faces tear-stained and blank. When the door burst open and Maya rushed past the officers, Grace's little voice cut through the chaos. "Mama, I knew David would find us." Those 6 words undid me. I stood in the parking lot, shoulders shaking, while the police led Daniel out in cuffs. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the girls. He just stared straight ahead, a man who had finally run out of people to blame. The girls were checked by paramedics, shaken but physically unharmed. The nightmare was over, but the fight wasn't. The custody hearing took place 4 days later in a wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of old paper and floor wax. Daniel appeared via video from the county jail, still wearing an orange jumpsuit. Maya sat beside me, her back ramrod straight. Ms. Alberts had prepared a binder 3 inches thick. The arrest records, the texts, Tiffany's sworn affidavit, the police report from Mobile, school records showing Emma and Grace had flourished in Maya's care, and testimony from Mrs. Alton and the dry cleaner about Maya's character. Daniel's court-appointed lawyer tried to argue that his client had simply been exercising his parental rights, that the girls needed their biological father. But when Daniel spoke, his voice whining about how he'd made some mistakes but just wanted to be a family, the judge, a stern woman named Judge Calloway, cut him off. She said she had rarely seen such a clear pattern of abandonment, manipulation, and endangerment. In a voice that left no room for appeal, she terminated Daniel's parental rights and granted sole legal and physical custody to Maya. Then she looked at me over her glasses. "Mr. Callahan, you are not the biological father. But from everything I've read, you are the one who showed up. I hope you understand the responsibility you've taken on." I told her I did, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. That evening, we took the girls for ice cream. It was a small, normal thing. Emma got chocolate all over her nose. Grace asked if we could get a dog someday. Maya laughed, a real laugh, the first I'd heard in weeks. And sitting in that booth under the fluorescent lights, I felt something shift in my chest. Those walls I'd built for 10 years didn't crash down dramatically. They just quietly dissolved. I looked at Maya and she looked back at me, and no words were needed. The arrangement was over. This was real. 2 months later, in early spring, we moved into a small house on the edge of town. It had 3 bedrooms, a yard with a maple tree, and a porch where the girls could hang a strand of lights at Christmas. The church community helped with the down payment, a gift organized by Mrs. Alton. I found a new job at a distribution center closer to home, and Maya started working part-time at a florist. We were building something. And then, one Sunday morning in April, Maya handed me a small box. Inside was a ring, not a borrowed pen this time, but a simple silver band engraved with the date we'd signed that courthouse certificate. She said, "I want to do it again. Not for CPS, not for the court, for us." I slid the ring onto her finger, and this time when I kissed her, it wasn't a brief touch in front of a bored clerk. It was a promise. The surprising detail came a few weeks later on a quiet Tuesday. I came home from work to find Emma and Grace sitting on the front steps, their backpacks beside them, holding a piece of paper. Emma thrust it at me. It was a school assignment, a hand-drawn family tree with boxes for names. There was Maya, Emma, Grace, and in the box labeled Father, they had written my name, David Callahan. Grace pointed at the paper. "Teacher said we could pick who belongs in our family. We picked you." I knelt on the porch the same way I'd knelt when I first met them, and I couldn't speak. Finally, I managed. "You know, I was never a gift. You two were the gift for me and for your mom." Emma frowned, thinking, "Maybe we were all gifts," she said. "Like the boxes. Only we didn't know we had them until we opened them." A year passed. The maple tree in the yard turned gold and dropped its leaves, and we hung Christmas lights on the porch, a whole strand, bright and unbroken. On the anniversary of that first delivery, we threw a small party. Mrs. Alton came. Sergeant Ruiz came. Even Ms. Landry, the social worker, stopped by and hugged Maya like an old friend. And at the end of the night, when the guests had gone and the girls were asleep, Maya took my hand and placed it on her stomach. She didn't have to say a word. I felt the tears come, hot and silent. I thought about the man I'd been, a warehouse worker who kept the world at arm's length, who delivered boxes but never stayed. Now there would be another child, a child who would never know a day of abandonment, a child who would grow up in a house where a father stayed. The twins had asked on that cold porch if I was their gift, but the truth was, they had given me a life I never thought I deserved. And that was the greatest gift of all. I still keep that delivery list in the glove box of my truck. 12 addresses, 11 grateful families, one stop that rewired my entire existence. The truth is, I almost drove away that night. I almost convinced myself that a warehouse worker with a broken heart didn't belong in someone else's messy, desperate story. And if I had, I would have missed everything. We spend so much of our lives believing that our small actions don't matter, that dropping off boxes, fixing a step, showing up on a Saturday isn't enough to change anything. But here's the thing no one tells you. Miracles don't always look like miracles. Sometimes they look like a frozen turkey and a strand of lights and a question from a child that catches you so off guard you can't remember how to breathe. The world is full of people holding on by a thread, and you might be the only person who reaches out. You might be the only one who doesn't look away. Emma and Grace are 8 now. They still draw family pictures, and the stick figure with the blue shirt is always there. Our youngest, a little boy we named Albert after Maya's father, is learning to walk. The farm we dreamed about never materialized, but the house on the edge of town feels like a mansion because it's full of noise and love, and the kind of chaos I once thought I'd never deserve. 10 years I spent convinced that my best days were behind me, that the scar of that divorce had sealed me off from anything good. All it took was one question on a cold porch to shatter that lie forever. Here's what I want you to sit with, maybe long after this video ends. Who in your life is waiting for someone to stay? Who is scanning every stranger's face for a miracle you might be able to deliver? It doesn't take a grand gesture. It takes showing up. It takes being willing to let your walls down long enough to hear the whisper of someone else's need. I was just a guy with a truck. You're just a person watching a video. But what you do next could be the answer to a prayer someone has been praying for years. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about the gifts you've been hoarding without even knowing it, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe because we tell the kinds of stories that remind you hope isn't a fairy tale, it's a choice. And maybe, just maybe, it's the choice you make today. I'll see you in the next one.